I always like being able to provide new tools for you as a certified trainer so that it helps to make your presentations feel like they're more under control and that you understand all of the pieces. And most of the time I have people asking, how do you train that spiritual resource? So we went to a number of our national consultants and asked them that same question, and they have provided their answers that you can then look at and use and bring into your presentations. So use this. You're welcome to ask further questions, but I do hope that this video is helpful for you. Thanks to all you do and for being a certified trainer.
One of the important 11 essential resources for stability in our lives is what we call the spiritual resource. And a spiritual resource is not to be mistaken with a specific religious denomination or a specific belief, but it's more a sense of purpose, a belief in something that's greater than ourselves, a sense of hope. And so someone who is high and healthy in spiritual resources, feels hopeful, has a sense of purpose, sort of knows the way that they're going, and it takes steps to get there. Someone who's low in spiritual resources might present as hopeless, might present as a fated destiny of what's the point in trying. And so it's a really important resource for us to be able to recognize and a respectful way of reframing some of the things that we may see in some of the families and individuals that we serve. And it's an important resource for us to build ourselves to have a good quality of life.
Spiritual resources is about the source of strength we get from something outside ourselves, whether that is a higher power, a religion, or a community of people, family and friends, where we can go to for a source of strength that we don't get for ourselves, or it helps augment our own sense of resiliency. In the research, if you lack spiritual resources, you tend to be more prone to depression, sadness, you tend to get sicker more often. When you do get sick, you take longer to recover. So spiritual resources is an important part of what helps us be strong, especially during our personal storms in life. So one rule of thumb is that we're always either going into a storm, getting out of a storm, or are in a storm. And so spiritual resources is about that sense of hope and fortitude we get from something that is beyond just ourselves.
Presenting the spiritual resource during the resources module can sometimes be challenging depending on the audience, in that we're never sure maybe what we're allowed to talk about with spirituality and faith, and it can be you can have some questions about what you're allowed to talk about. I have found it useful to present the spiritual resource from a more global perspective. It's the spiritual arena in which the big questions of life are dealt with. Who am I? Where did I come from? What's the purpose? Why am I here? Are all inherently spiritual questions, regardless of what a person may believe in, God or a different faith system, or believe in nothing at all. We're still asking those kinds of spiritual questions. And how we see or answer those questions really determines a lot of how we show up in the world, how we think the world works, and how to be successful in the world. So when we can understand a person's spiritual resource from the perspective of how are you answering the big questions of life, that can be helpful in understanding how people are interacting in the other arenas, the other resources, for example, how they view relationships, how they view their own potential for change. There's a lot that goes into dealing with our lives that comes from the spiritual arena. And it doesn't have to be a specific faith. It doesn't have to be a specific belief system. It's the recognition that, even people who don't believe in God, for example, at all, still have a faith system, a spiritual resource about how they think the world works. That can be a really interesting and useful way to interact with people that we're dealing with, especially when it gets down to the individual relationship building arena. So I present the faith perspective from that. The other thing that or the spiritual resources from that perspective. But the other thing that I like to talk about is that sometimes, especially in programs that are influenced or under government, there's a sense that we can never talk with people about their faith. not to advocate for any particular faith system, but I will use a quote from the Bible, James 2, verse 5, which says, "Has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith?" And I emphasize that when we are doing resource assessments with individual people, we want to find their strongest resource. And sometimes the strongest resource that I have discovered in working with people who are coming from maybe more challenging circumstances is they lean very heavily on their faith. And so I'm not going to try to talk a person into having a faith, but if I discover that a person does have a faith and it's a strong resource, I want to freely converse with them about that so that they can access that strong faith to address other areas of their life. So 2 things, look at the global picture. How are individuals you're working with addressing the big questions of life, and how does that inform the way they interact in their world? And then recognize that sometimes, even though you may never bring it up, you will discover in people a strong spiritual resource, and don't be afraid to talk about it. It's a part of the resources. It's one of the brilliant things that I think Ruby included in her original list, and I continue to benefit from seeing it through that lens.
We can define the spiritual resource in terms of the 3 P's. The 3 P's stand for purpose, power, and promise. We know that individuals who have a sense of purpose in life tend to lead happier, more productive lives. We can instill a sense of purpose among our students by having them engage in activities such as volunteering, helping to take care of a younger child. Power refers to a strong belief in a power that is greater than we are, a higher power. And this is a power that we can go to in times of need. We can help students to develop a sense of power by engaging them in activities such as mindfulness. The 3rd P stands for promise. Hope would actually be a better word, but hope doesn't start with the letter P, so we'll go with promise. And when we talk about promise in the sense of the spiritual resource, we're in essence talking about a future story. And we know that there are students in our classrooms who do not have a strong sense of future. We can engage them in activities for older students, such as predicting their grades, so that gives them a future story for our classes. For younger students, we can simply have them plant a flower, and there are many other types of activities that we can utilize in the classroom to help to develop a sense of future for our students. For all of us, when we think about the saying, the source of which is unknown, while I breathe, I hope, this is our hope for our students.